Welcome back to the Roll Your Mind vodcast. Today I'm excited to have our special guest, Dr. Amit Mehta. He's a doctor by trade, but he's got his hands in a lot of different and wears a lot of different hats. Angel investor, venture capitalist, and serial entrepreneurs. I guess is how I describe him. And I'm excited to pick his brain about leadership, uh, performance, and how does he help his teams manage stress and motivate them. So welcome, Amit. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
me. Yeah. So
Good to be here.
I know yeah, appreciate it. Amit and I also are colleagues at Fundamental Sports Management. It's a sports agency here in San Antonio, and so he's a board member. I'm the director of human performance. So we've connected in that way, and him and I always have good conversations. So that's why I wanted to have him on. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like how'd you get into all these different different kind of entrepreneurial activities, even though you're an MD by trade.
Sure. So it's kind of interesting. As you said, I'm a physician by trade. So I'm an interventional radiologist. What that means is we do minimally invasive image guided surgery. So it's very technically oriented, very technology heavy. And when I was first starting out training, got very interested in device development and developing new technology. So that took two pieces. One was sort of creation and being creative on an engineering side. And then obviously the other side is you need money. So was able to be creative on the management side, but couldn't really raise any money. At that time, I know I look really young, but I'm actually fairly old. It wasn't cool to be 22 and trying to raise $3-4 million. So I'd had a startup, and I got the startup bug when I was in Boston. And we took that technology and formed a company and went with it and didn't work, but learned a lot, but got interested in investing at the time. So over the course of my career, sort of as a physician, kept my eye on developing technologies and how to invest in them. And so became an angel investor. And then one day my co-founder on that company, who I'd lost touch with, but was friends with, I noticed a blog post that he'd become a partner in the second largest venture capital fund in Silicon Valley. And so I just reached out to him, which, goes to tell you to people, I mean, don't hesitate to reach out to folks. And a 15-minute planned breakfast turned into an 8-hour session. And next thing you know, I was in the world of venture capital and now a partner at our new fund. So we're a $250 million fund. A $200 million fund that's investing in Series A companies. So,
yeah, wow, yeah. So, one of the things that intrigued me about that story was your first venture didn't work, but you stuck with it. Like you said, you learned a lot. From my world of performance psychology, we talk a lot about that growth mindset, the ability to bounce back from failures and setbacks. What made you you said you caught the bug, like, so was it just passion? What interested you about kind of that world of creating something, starting a business, and then trying to get funding for it? You said you like both sides. What was it about it that really intrigued you?
I mean, I think if you take a step back and you look at yourself, and I try to instill this value in my kids, right, is that you have to keep trying. And there's just because something doesn't work doesn't mean the next one's not going to work. And it's very difficult to entertain that mindset. And particularly in medical training, I would say that you learn from your mistakes, right? I mean, you'd like to get to a place of proficiency where you can do surgery or whatever it may be and not make mistakes. But, you have complications and you learn from those complications. Sometimes those are patient related, sometimes they're operator related, but you try to learn from each experience. So medicine especially is a profession where not everything goes right every day. And to take that mindset and moving into investing is something that is definitely a skill set that's helped me as an investor. I mean, not every investment made is done well. You want more than less to do well, and then that's considered success. But that's I think it came from my medical training and having a foundation in that sort of taught me to keep going despite I either failures or pivots. They're not every change in my mind is a failure. If you can pivot something into success, it's just improvement. It's not necessarily failure all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So it's constantly trying to get better. And yeah, I love that you're transferring that skill from medical school into investing, but then you're also, as a parent, trying to pass that on to your kids. So that knowledge base continues and that skill of learning to bounce back from failures is continuing. I would be remiss if we didn't like acknowledge the crazy world that we're living in now, right? Like we've just come through a shutdown, at least here in Texas. Things are opening back up, but it's still a little strange. Right before this, you're talking about maybe going out to dinner for the first time, socially distanced dinner, right? But creating that creates stress, and then you have a lot of things going on in the world that creates more stress, right? And I know you've seen that within the businesses that you work in. Obviously, you're being in the medical field, you've probably seen firsthand. Maybe some of your colleagues, people that are dealing with stress, whether it's from the pandemic or even what's going on in just the world now. How do you help people? You talked about bouncing back from failure, but what are things that you've noticed, or the teams you lead, or the people you work with, or the companies you're investing in? What are some of the things that have helped them manage and get through crisis and through challenges? Not necessarily this one, but
Uh,
any.
Sure. It's interesting that you said, so I would look at the various facets of things I do, and the way people deal with stress or the way they deal with adversity is very different. As a physician, obviously there's a portion of this that's health related. And there's mind and body, and when the body is hurting, the mind hurts. And so we really encourage patients to get over to really help with the body part, and the mind part can follow. On the investing side, it's a little different, right? I mean, most investors are sitting at home in the pandemic. They're not sick. They're on Zoom calls, and
Right.
it's the mind that hurts. And that is an interesting interchange, in that dealing with mental illness or mental anguish or stress is just as difficult as having, lung problems from an infection.
Right.
It affects you in a different way, and it can be a bit more insidious. But the path to fixing both those things is very similar, which is to get those two things, the mind, the body, in concert, and the spirit, working together to try to overcome some of that adversity.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. You and I have had conversations about. I know you do deep dives, and some of the companies you're investing in are about health and wellness, right? And I know one is
Mhm.
gut microbiome, right? But you've deep dived and posted stuff on social media about vitamins and looking and learning about what is going to keep us healthy. In my world, we talk about the fundamental to performance is sleep, activity, nutrition, right? Like taking care of those three is fundamental to performing well in any endeavor. And then some of the mental skills that we teach in sport and performance psychology come into that. But if you haven't slept well, it's hard to focus, right? It's hard to have confidence, right? And so this idea of getting the mind right, in addition to the body, obviously they work in concert. Are there specific things that either you practice for yourself to keep your mind healthy, particularly under stress, or like maybe even the last month going through this lockdown, that you've been more focused on in terms of keeping yourself less stressed and more focused, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think I try to espouse the same philosophy that I tell our companies and our patients and those kinds of things. So, from a mind perspective, I mean, outlook is a big thing. And again, I tell my kids this all the time, is that, and there's been studies that have shown that happiness does lead to more happiness. So we, for example, in our home before bed every night, talk about three things that made us happy during the day, whether it's the smell of a chocolate chip cookie to, for me, a success in a deal, or a patient did well, whatever it may be. It can be small, it can
Right.
be big, but we focus on that. So from a mental perspective, we articulate out loud things that give us mindfulness. I try to
Yeah.
meditate. Again, lots of data, and happy to share that with whomever is interested.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's not a hokey thing anymore, right? So meditation
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
something really. So those are two things that I try to do from a mind perspective. During this pandemic, I've started to exercise a lot more.
Yeah.
So we go for bike rides and those kinds of things. So for an active mind and an active body, those are very straightforward things. Other things that we do, or I do specifically in working with the companies and the patients that we work with, is try to impart techniques that can help. So, it's a new culture with Zoom and staying at home and social distancing. And so we'll try to empower people with tools of how to deal with those things specifically and addressing things that are stressing the constituents specifically. So we've had companies that have had issues, for example, dealing with the pandemic and dealing from remote teams. So we tried to help them put infrastructure into place for dealing with that. We have patients that come in that have trouble dealing with not understanding what the scope of illness is with COVID. So everyone comes into the emergency room and every cough is COVID, or every ankle sprain is COVID. So for each different person, it's a different specifically tailored help set, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah, yeah. You and I had I guess several months ago at this point, had a conversation. We were talking about exercise as stress management. I know that you mentioned you're working out more, but that in general, that for you and for me as well, exercise is not like the same stress reliever that other people, like, even friends and family members that we have that that's their way of releasing their stress. Now that you've worked out more, I know you did exercise before that anyways, but that wasn't your go-to stress reliever. Uh, have you noticed any differences in terms of, adding more exercise? Like, what is that doing for you? How is that helping you?
Oh, absolutely. Exercise, whether I believed it or not, on a regular basis, does make a big change and improves sleep, improves your cognition, improves your cardiovascular health, and all of those things then lead to better mood. And so that is something personally I think that it's a real life internal experiment. I feel much, much better now. And it's not like I do that much exercise. I do a 20-minute bike every day, which is not a huge amount of exercise, but has made a significant and relevant change in my life. So it's something that I encourage everyone to do, and people will notice the change as well.
People notice a change in themselves, or you? Yeah.
No, they notice a change in, we're nicer people, or, look much more svelte than we were before. But I think there is, it's just like folks who meditate. You have a glow around you that's a little different, pepper in your step and that kind of thing. So I think if you can synchronize this mind-body aspect of your performance, then it takes some time, but it does pay dividend because it does work.
Yeah. The science is there, right? We know that these things have the impact that they claim to have, right? This is somewhat of a pivot, but I think based off of, one of the things that stresses people out is time management, right? And particularly, going Zoom call, doing, I don't know. I personally have felt busier during the shutdown than I did beforehand, just because there's more meetings, more, things going on. But I've always been fascinated by you because you have so many projects going on, by your ability to manage all this. So what are some of the strategies you have to managing your day and all, keeping track of all these different projects that you have going on? Because I rattled off a few, but there's a ton that I didn't mention that you're involved with and have a pulse on. So what are some of the things you do to keep you focused and knowing what's going on in each of those projects?
Sure. Yeah. I think early on, I tried to figure out what my skill sets were, and golf is not one of them. So one of the skill sets that I realized that something that I could do well was multitask. And so efficiency and multitasking was something that I actively studied and tried to understand. And the genesis of that came, I think, I remember very vividly, I was doing a rotation when I was in medical school with a surgeon who did aortic valve replacements. And typically an aortic valve replacement for a cardiothoracic surgeon takes 2, 3, 4 hours. It's a long surgery, put someone on a bypass machine. This surgeon could do an aortic valve in 45 minutes. And so I sat with him for a long time and said, you know what, tell me, how are you doing this? Where everyone takes 4 hours, you're doing something in 45 minutes. Because I realized that is a skill set that if you could understand how something like that happened, then you could apply that in other facets of your life. And he, explained to me what they were doing. What he had done was studied efficiency, and every hand movement he made was purposeful, as opposed to, every step he knew was purposeful. So instead of taking a scalpel off the table, making a cut, putting the scalpel back, he would put his hand out, the scalpel would go into his hand, he'd make the cut, put it back, the person would take the scalpel and give him the next tool, and so forth. So everything was orchestrated. So I've tried to do that in my life with the multitasking that I do. And then I've enabled that with both technology and a mindset of trying to de-stress. I mean, because I am doing a lot of projects, and I think if I let the stress or complication sort of get to me, then it would bog me down so much that the other projects would suffer. So from a physical perspective, I use technology a lot. We use Trello and Slack and WhatsApp and so forth. And we're able to compartmentalize and keep projects moving with a great degree of organization. And then mentally, what I do is just make sure that I'm staying healthy and de-stressed in a performance manner, that I can engage with all of the folks that I work with in a way that's at my best all the time, so that I'm not slowing down any of our projects.
Right. I love that. I love that. I work with a lot of different leaders, and to hear you talk about slowing down so that you can be at your best is great to hear, because I don't always see that, right? When people, a lot of times under stress, and maybe you've seen this with other people you've worked with, is when they're under stress, they actually put their heads down and push forward more. You are taking some time for yourself so you can be there for the people that need you, right, and need your support. The other piece that I'm curious about is, because you have all these projects, I would imagine delegation is probably a skill that you have developed over time. Uh, was that easy for you? What did you do? Were you always good at delegating, or is that something that developed over time?
No, that is absolutely a skill that you have to develop over time. I think type A OCD folks have trouble delegating, but I will say I also have a touch of attention deficit, in terms of not clinically, but colloquially. And so it became a little easier over time when number of projects added on, that, I got bored very quickly. But I think what I have done, and I take pride in, is that I've worked with a lot of people, and I have partners in my projects who I trust implicitly and develop a relationship around, that I help coach them through what they're doing. If we're doing something, if it's a skill set I have, but at the same rate, if it's a skill set that they have, I try to empower them to help me to help them do a better job. And so it is delegation, but it's delegation on a little bit of a different level, where sort of empowering partners to be equal and work together towards a common goal, which in a classic sort of CEO/employee relationship is very difficult to do. But that's something that I think all my partners will tell you in all my projects, that we work well together, and everyone feels equally heard, and everyone knows that they have a seat at the table, and everyone's just as important as each other. So we try to flatten structure. Obviously, that can only be successful if the folks have talent and are able to execute on the mission.
Yeah, that talent piece, right? You have to, one, know what you're doing, right? But once that's taken care of, even with talent, people aren't able to always either flatten the structure or have that trust. Are there things that you do within these partnerships that help establish that trust and build on it and maintain it? Because just because you trust somebody now doesn't mean as time progresses that trust remains. I would say most relationships you have to work at, right? You have to put in some time to develop that trust. Are there things that you do specifically to help build that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there are things that I do specifically as an active. I think by interacting with folks in a manner that's essentially, non-aggressive, non-authoritarian, and without ego, partners, people, friends, folks get onto a mindset of equality and understand that I have their best interest at heart, and we're working together. And it's not an ego boost. I mean, if I need an ego boost, there's lots of other things I can go get ego boost from. So that just the working relationship, if you're a nice person, stuff works. So it's a working relationship that takes time to nurture. This doesn't happen day one. And I can tell you, I've had partnerships that have failed. I mean, we just the personalities were just not congruent, and there was too much. It was too abrasive that for me as well. I mean, I just needed to get out of those types of relationships. So again, this goes back to our original portion of the conversation: is that just because you fail or pivot doesn't mean just try again. I mean, you'll find the people that you can resonate with and work with and grow organizations with.
Yeah. I mean, so I love talking to somebody who's applying this. I've studied a lot of these concepts. I pass these on to the leaders I work with. Sometimes you get to see it in action, but the way you're describing it can come across as like, yeah, it's just what I do. It's pretty easy. In reality, I would imagine it's much more difficult. Did you seem like you're a lifelong learner, so you're constantly trying to develop yourself. But did you have mentors, coaches that helped you develop some of these skills, or did some of this stuff just come naturally? Was it trial and error? Is it just being a nice guy that helps, get some of these partnerships going? I'm curious how you developed these skills, because it's, there's a lot of research on everything that you're describing, and I'm just curious how you got.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that it was innate and just I'm awesome. Right. I'd love to say that, but it's not. It was. This is sort of what I'm talking about with the efficiency with this aortic valve surgeon. It was actively deciding and trying to figure out what are my deficiencies and then to work on them. And, it's easier said than done. It's difficult for someone. It was difficult for me, highly functioning sort of folks to say I'm deficient at something. But it was what I had done over time was said, okay, I need to get to an end goal, and that end goal is X, and then how do I get there? I mean, I would sit and think about it, and, spent time, and I still do that. I still think about things all the time, and actively pursue people, whether it's people, books, podcasts, information at all times. Even walking in a mall, you can pick up things that will help you understand how to do those things. So no, I mean, it's an active pursuit and it's ongoing. And I would say to your original question, when you're working with other people, is it just because you're a nice guy? I mean, I try to lead by example. So I can tell you most of the people I work with will never criticize that I'm not harder working them. You can call me at 4 a.m. and I'll pick up and have a 20-minute conversation about whatever we're doing. And, it's lead by example. So work harder, than everybody else. Try to be nicer than everybody else, try to do things, and I try to do that. And that's something I've learned from other folks that I've worked with.
Yeah. I've mentioned this already on this podcast before, but my watchwords that I teach my clients are being curious, trying to develop some accuracy in the way they're viewing the world, and then how do you be clear, right? And add clarity to your communication, to your actions, et cetera. Right? And I think you're embodying all those things. But that curiosity piece, I think, is where a lot of people get tripped up, because self-reflection or reflection in general is not something that our society does a lot, and or in a workplace setting, a lot of times self-reflection just looks like you daydreaming, right?
Wasting time.
Right. Yeah. Or wasting time. And that's frowned upon. So what does that process look like for you? Is it just on the drive to work, or do you set aside some time to actually like reflect on whether it's a project or, something else going on that you want to improve upon, and search for some of those deficiencies that you want to get better at?
Sure. I mean, the biggest thing I guess I could impart on your viewers is that it's an active process rather than a passive process. And we're sort of taught generically as that it's either a passive thing or, you either have it or you don't. And I can tell you, I'm not someone who had it. I learned it actively. And the active portion, I think now, 20 years later sort of thing, it's just part of my routine and part of my mindset that, when I talk to you, for example, not on this podcast, but in a car or whatever, I'm learning from you. and I try to listen to what you're saying and take nuggets of information in all of the stuff that we're talking about, whether it's the Spurs or this or that, but in there's nuggets of information that I'll take out and internally digest. And so it's at the beginning, it was active. I read books on X, Y, or Z, or read papers and did research and talked to people actively, like the Sergio. I mean, I sat with him for an hour a week for 6 weeks and said, I need you to teach me this. I mean, I'm interested in what you've done. And it's always interesting when you ask people, they want to help you. I think most people want to help. And so I would say in my sort of 20s and early 30s, it was very active. But now it's just become part of my routine just because I've been so used to doing it. And I take those things. But what I tell people I work with, and this is, something is that when you read a book, make a presentation, like write PowerPoint slides as if you were going to teach someone what you're reading in that book. And I tell a lot of startup CEOs that as you go through something and you learn about leadership or public speaking or whatever it may be, make these PowerPoint presentations, and I guarantee you'll come back to it and pull a slide out one day because you need it. So I did that for a long time, and I had notebooks of these notes. But now it's sort of just, it's internal now. Just do it as a second sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's going to evolve and you don't need to necessarily do that as much, particularly when you're learning. And now that it's kind of just part of that process, as you said. I love that that's something you're imparting on the startups. Are there any trends and patterns you see with like young startups? I know they're all different businesses, all different personalities, but are there any trends and patterns on things where they get stuck on, not so much on the particular business that they have, but from that social emotional leadership perspective that they have or don't have that you see, or anything that you find interesting about kind of that type of entrepreneur, right? That is trying to start up a company in technology, in a technology driven space. Are there any patterns or trends you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, these are relentless folks, right? I mean, startup life is not an easy life. You max out all your credit cards, you live in a garage. And so there's a certain amount of tenacity in these folks that you just don't see all the time. And there is, I would say, over time, working with enough startups, depending on what stage of a company you're investing in, you meet a lot of folks, and the personality set is very different. So someone who's doing a pure startup is a very different person than someone who's a Series C company executive. Those folks are the Series C kind of folks are used to having a crew of 50 or 100 that they're managing, and the way they manage people is very different than the two guys in a garage kind of thing. So, as a fund and as a firm, our firm is committed to understanding that mental health is something that plays a big part in a startup success. So, as you know, we have an in-house therapist who's on staff who helps both on the company side with the various stages of company. And we deal with sort of seed angel up to Series A, early B kind of company. So we're in a very specific mindset of entrepreneurs. And so that's what our in-house therapist works at, as well as the folks in our fund, as well as we deal with them and need help with them. So there is a huge commitment to mental health and an understanding that can make or break a company. And to your question, in terms of what exactly is that, it's probably three things. One is an internal dynamic between the founders of a company or the members in a company, obviously in a stressful situation, helping people understand how to deal with your colleagues. And then there's a component that's about internal stress as an individual, as a founder of a company, just dealing with this 1,000 things happening at the same time. And then the third is your interaction with the world around you and what your company is trying to do and deal with other people. So those are kind of the three facets that we talk about and look at when we're working with folks.
Yeah, I know when I've worked with particularly younger entrepreneurs, and maybe it's not a startup that they're going into, looking for investing money, but just starting a business. They feel a lot of pressure in making sure that they're doing right by their employees. Right now, they have this other pressure that's added to it, and some of them don't succeed because they allow that pressure to overwhelm them, right? And then others are able to succeed because they push through that or figure out a way to deal with it. Do you have, I know we've talked a little bit about stress and energy management. are there things that are taught to these, whether by that, in-house therapist that is helping them manage, that stress of not just the people, but that pressure of of that feeling like they need to succeed, and if they don't, their worlds might be over. I don't know if that's something that you've seen, but just curious.
Yeah, I think the biggest portion of that I've seen is this active versus passive, in that we want folks to understand and acknowledge that they have stress, that there's issues of dealing with other folks or the world around them, and that active acknowledgement that that is an issue is actually the function that we're trying to get in part of. Because once you realize that, then you start working towards some of that stuff. So
Yeah,
until you say, "Oh, that is an issue," it never surfaces.
I love that you brought that up because I think that's what I see in the world going on right now. Right, is sometimes we're not acknowledging the impact of you know these crises going on, right? And we're not acknowledging that this is having an impact on us. So then once you acknowledge it, like you said, you can start taking some action, whether it's going to bed earlier, doing some meditation, eating right, you know, doing some gratitude journaling, right, with the family. But you have to acknowledge it, right, and be more self-aware to know that. I was just telling my wife I'm reading the news too much, right, personally. So I need to take a step back and not do that because it's stressing me out a little bit, right? Looking at the numbers, right, of what's going on in the world, and so practicing that, right? And once I acknowledge it, then I was able to, like you said, do something about it. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that aspect of stress management. Are there, with these companies, are there any things that's the health and wellness aspect of things, right? That you talk about a lot, that you and I have talked a lot about. Do you implement any kind of education on what they could be doing from a physical health for these startups, right? Like making sure that they're maintaining physical health, nutrition, all those other things. You talked about the mental health side, but how about the other aspect of that dyad of mind body?
It's interesting. I'd love to. The truth is we don't. And the
Yeah,
largest impediment to that is what we're talking about, which is this acknowledgement piece. And
yeah,
most of these folks have their head down and they're focused on their company and what they're doing, and they don't acknowledge that stress or interactions with the run until there's a break point, right? I mean, till a board of a company that we're on and we're replacing a CEO because they've done bad things or they're just not effective leaders. When you have an inflection point like that, then there's an opportunity to have a discussion and say, look, you're being removed as CEO because you're not functioning well, and maybe you want to think about XYZ. So at those inflection points, there's an opportunity to have some active coaching and try to get people to actively acknowledge that. But until then, we don't. I have not seen a lot of change. I mean, there are those who actively acknowledge and manage it and are doing it because they're interested in it. But and we have
yeah,
conversations, around sort of around the table all the time. And just like I'm telling you, which is over the years, I was one of those folks that when someone said something like that to me, I took it to heart, went away, looked at it, and said, oh, you know what, and came up with the fact that meditation, for example, has a lot of clean science behind it that is really beneficial. But if I just had listened to someone who said, "Oh, I'm meditating," and that's hokey, and I don't want to do that, spacey stuff, would have never impacted me and made a difference for me. So while we try to impart knowledge, just in a very non-judgmental way, it's up to that
yeah,
individual to take it away.
yeah. Of course, yeah. You can only lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink, kind of idea.
Right. And
Um,
these are type A,
yeah.
high functioning people, right?
Right,
So
right, yeah, they're intelligent. They're there for a reason, right? And so
when
yeah,
when
sometimes
you're
it's
20
hard.
and when you're 20 and you have 20 million invested in you, you pretty much think you know how to do everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, yes, yes. That's an interesting point. I know we're both working within the sports agency. Do you see any comparisons between these young high go-getters, in Silicon Valley, compared to some of the athletes that you're working with, in terms of that mindset or learning and that kind of any parallels there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels actually between the exposure I have to the athletes that we have at FSM. I mean,
Yeah,
these folks are driven, right? They're very focused, but the
yeah,
difference is the NBA stars that we have at FSM have gotten there because they've learned. I mean, they're young, but they've already learned to this point how to focus on a skill and hone in and do it well. I mean, that's how they got to where they are. A
right,
lot of the folks in the startup world are still learning that if they're on their first startup. I mean, folks who've had 2 or 3 startups before understand how to do that, and that's why when you look at venture, um, CEOs who have started and successfully exited other companies, it's a little easier to invest in them because they understand the game.
right,
But it's not to say
right,
we don't invest in first time CEOs. I mean, if the company is good and the CEO is capable, we'll invest. But I think there's more active learning in those folks than the athletes. The athletes, whether they know it or not, have begun and are honing in on those skills. And if they spend the time to continue to hone those skills, I think they become much better.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's that deliberate practice, that constant strive for improvement, as opposed to like, I made it, I'm done. I don't need to work on anything else. You mentioned a couple things that I wanted to highlight that really stuck out to me, which was the asking piece, right? Asking for help. You did that with the one surgeon to learn about efficiency, right? You did it with the startup, your partner that you got into venture capital, or you just asked, right? And that's a very simple action, but to get there is very challenging for some people, right? To just put themselves out there, and you even brought up earlier about um, acknowledging deficiencies, right? Or saying that you need some help. What could somebody do to help them like get over some of that emotional baggage that comes with like seeking help or putting themselves out there? You seem like a confident person, so that's makes it easier for you. But if somebody struggles with that, what would you tell them?
I mean, I will say I struggled with it a lot, actually. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a component of ego, right? I mean, you
yeah,
again, highly functioning folks, you think you know everything, and why do you have to ask somebody else for help? But again, that's actively worked on that and realized you make enough mistakes, you realize that you actually don't know everything. But short of
yeah,
that, yeah, I mean, you just have to do it. I mean, you do, and again, I get to teach my kids. I mean, do things that make you uncomfortable and you'll become comfortable. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, I've taken kids on things, and the first time riding a bike, they didn't want to do it, but once now we ride bikes every
right,
day. I mean, they get good at it, right? And so
right,
use do that as an active task and start with your family, and then from your family go to your friends, and then you can do it to strangers. I mean, I do it to strangers. I mean, go up to people at a conference after and just tell me 3 things about what are you working on, and learn a
right,
lot from these people. And so it can be done, and you just have to actively work on it and put your ego
right. Yeah,
aside, basically.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I mean, it's challenging, but that's the process, right? Is to get over that
Right.
challenge by doing it, right, and ripping that band-aid off and just going for it. But I like your approach to starting by asking people that you know and you're more comfortable with, and then working your way up into just walking up to somebody at a conference or somewhere else and asking for some support. Um, and this is, I mean, I have a ton of notes based off of our conversation. I love it. I love to see it in action, right? Leaders applying the things that I've studied for a couple decades at this point, but seeing it in action, and then your process of how you came to these things, right? Because sometimes when you're working with Type A people, you don't get to learn their inner workings, right? Unless they write a book or do some of these interviews where they explain how they got there. Um, if whether it's a startup, an athlete, just maybe a guy trying to or a gal trying to start a business, what advice would you give them? Let's assume that they have some talent, they have some skill at whatever they're trying to do. What would be something about starting a business from a social, emotional, mental standpoint, like that could help them in any of these things that we've talked about so far? Developing communication, how to motivate people, how to publicly speak. What would be some of your advice to them?
I think the biggest thing is you have to manage your time effectively. And what most people end up doing when they get into a startup, especially, is that you devote 100 hours a week towards that one thing, and you have a singular
Right.
goal, and you give up, right? I mean, the tenacity to keep going after that goal, which, don't get me wrong, is important. But if, like you had said before, like if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're not mindful of the other things that it takes, then you're not going to be successful. And the most difficult thing for people to understand is that, and again, I've been like this as well, is that if I have 100 hours this week, I'm going to put 100 hours towards this project, and the 1 hour meditating is a waste of time. But over
Right.
time, I can tell you from someone who's done it and who has worked in multiple disciplines and used that technique, that those ancillary things that take care of mind and body are so impactful and help you do your other job or other parts really well, and that you should spend the time to do it. And
Right.
again, it's an intangible, right? And you like, people like tangible things. You work on a company, have a product, you sell it, you get revenue. It's very tangible. You can measure that number. This is one of those intangible things, but it will reap rewards. I mean, I can tell you as someone who it's
Yeah.
worked for, that it's something that's very
Right.
important.
You know, 2 weeks ago, I had somebody else on that we were talking about elite performance, particularly in the military, the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets of the world, and then elite athletes. Um, there's a singular focus, right? Like this 100 hours a week that I have, I'm going to spend 100 hours trying to get good, right? That you just described. Is there such a thing as work-life balance when you're trying to do some of these things? And if there isn't, um, what can somebody do to maintain? I know you mentioned some of these things from a health standpoint, but from just a personal perspective, how do you maintain some work-life balance when you're trying to do some of these things, or is that a myth?
I think, yeah, I, I think my family would tell you it's a myth, but I would tell you that I would try to do it very well. But I,
Okay.
again, I mean, I think it's something, I think the work life balance concept is very different for different people. And it's
Right.
not a generic one formula for everybody to say, okay, put aside an hour a day to do this, that, and the other. You have to figure out what balance is for you, and then figure out, again, be cognizant and mindful of what you need. I mean, there's weeks where I will work 100 hours and not do a lot of the things that I'm talking about and espousing, because you know what, that week I realize I don't actually need it this week. I'm humming along, and
Right.
the stressors that are going on in the businesses that I run are not there this week as opposed to last week or the week coming up. So I don't need as much mindfulness as I do on another week. So I think it's just a personal thing. You just have to find that balance and start with some formula, and then work on iterating that formula on a week to week or month to month basis, for yourself, finding that balance. And I think once you do get that balance, you'll notice it. I mean, the weeks that I don't have stressors, I can feel the difference.
Right. Yeah. Um, I love that, that some weeks we need it, some weeks we don't. Do you ever, you don't strike me as a person that this would bother you, but some people like get really wrapped around data and like I need to meditate every day. And then if I don't, they beat themselves up. Right. And like, you seem like this week I don't need it. I'm good. Um, what would you tell somebody if they start, because I've seen this where people get so caught up in trying to manage their mental health that it becomes this own goal, and then when they don't meet that goal for self-development, it actually starts doing the opposite. It starts decreasing their confidence. So
Yeah.
what what would you, if a startup, a CEO from a startup came to you and like was like, you said to meditate, I can't meditate every day, what do I do? What would you tell that person?
Yeah, don't. I mean, do
Yeah.
what you got to do to get it done. And this, as someone who works and operates sort of multiple businesses, that happens to me all the time. Is that some weeks certain projects, businesses, tasks, whatever, are going to take more of my time than something else. So I don't sit there at the beginning of the week and say, of the 5 projects I'm working on, each is going to get 20 hours. And that's how the 100 hours is made up. This week, project 1 may take 27 and project 2 will suffer. But then I rebalance that on an ongoing basis. understanding what we need. And that's, again, that's a skill I think that over time, I didn't do that well many years ago, but now I'm able to manage that and slot in times. And again, tech has enabled that a lot, using calendars and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you can't meditate today, I mean, don't. Just, it doesn't need to stress you out. I mean, do it tomorrow if you need it. And if you determine you don't need it this week, don't do it. I mean, this is one of those things. It's an intangible. And if you don't find benefit from it, then don't do it.
Right. Okay. I love it. I mean, it's crazy. We've been chatting for 45 minutes. I've gotten a ton of notes, like I said, and learned a ton. And I know the people watching are picking up some great nuggets. So I really appreciate you taking some time talking to us today, giving us your insights on somebody that is very busy, managing a lot of people, managing a lot of projects, and the things you've learned, right, from your training in medicine to managing and helping startups achieve their goals. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for your time. If people wanted to learn more about you, where could they find you and learn more about what you got going on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the time today to talk to you
Yeah,
and talk about some of this stuff. It's something that is sort of important to me. And I think I continue to learn, right? And so I listen to what you're
yeah,
doing at FSM and with your consulting company and things that I think are really important. I'm available on the internet just like everybody else, but LinkedIn is a good
yeah,
place. And then
yeah.
some of the other social media channels, pretty easy to get a hold of.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see each other soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks. All right. See you later.